Good evening, everyone, and welcome to TCAF 2021. Before we begin, the Toronto Comics Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Pump Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for this land. We also acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. This acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live and work on colonized land and is an expression of the solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with the Indigenous communities of Toronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. I am thrilled today to welcome Hoche Anderson, Derf Backderf, and Nate Powell to this year's TCAF. These creators are united by works that capture the struggle and hope of protest movements past and present through the comics medium. Hoche Anderson's groundbreaking work King offers an intoxicating swirl of ever-changing artistry that encompasses the change, hope, and uncertainty of the civil rights movement and its legendary central figure, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Nate Powell, renowned for his collaboration on the March series documenting the life, labor, and good trouble of Congressman John Lewis, brings his distinctive interplay of light and shadow to his latest work, Save It for Later, a work that illuminates the daily struggle of navigating the political unrest of the present moment, especially as a parent. And finally, the meticulous research and artistry we have come to expect from Derf Backderf, author of such works as My Friend Dahmer and Trashed, once again fill the pages of his latest book, Kent State, a work that examines not only the very right to protest, but the tragic consequences of oppressing that right. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'd like to start you off with this first question before I pass the floor to you. How or why do you think the comics medium is an apt vehicle for protest, for representing protest movements, symbols, and figures, or for dismantling information around these movements, symbols, and figures?
It's a good question. I'd say in general, as far as unique strengths of comic storytelling, there is the tried and true argument that by reading through histories and accounts of protest movements through comics, it really plays to the strength of automatically, intuitively fostering a sense of empathy as a reader, sort of forcing a reader into the position of putting themselves in the shoes of subjects depicted in the books, often to a place beyond judgment, and that's a kind of intimacy, I think, which really helps, regardless of viewpoint, helps comics readers be able to navigate a lot of complexity and a lot of the ugly sides of humanity as well. Like, really, this is about giving comics readers more credit for a lot of the comics language that so much of us take for granted. And another thing simply has to do with the fact that, I mean, I'm a print comics person, so I'm going to speak about this in print comics form. Just, you know, the ability to simultaneously weigh and cross-reference information, both visual and textual, while reading from start to finish in a book. It's like, you know, as creators, we are controlling to a degree how our readers process what we're writing and drawing about, but an equal level of power rests with the reader to be able to simultaneously take notes, compare, and be able to bounce bits of each story back and forth with each other. And I think particularly within the pages of the March trilogy, that was something that I had kind of taken for granted up until that point, doing a nonfiction work of that scope. It became really important that I play to the strengths of a comic in terms of people being able to keep multiple components of the book going at once while they were reading through.
Take it away, Derf.
I'm trying to think what to say to follow that up. I can't say that I've really thought about that a lot because, comics are the way that I tell stories and always have since I was a kid. So for me, it's just kind of reflex. I mean, instinct. I can't imagine telling stories another way, honestly.
That's an important point too, though, that we as cartoonists are also comics readers.
Right.
So like when I was reading Kent State, for example, what I as a reader would see as you were processing all of your research, organizing it, structuring it, is very early on recognizing that your depiction of certain characters, certain real historical people, from iconic photographs that I had grown up seeing of the Kent State Massacre, worked for, in my mind as a reader, as basically seeds planted early on in the book, knowing that we were arriving at a tragic endpoint, but recognizing that you were telling this story in a way that worked whether or not someone had familiarity with these iconic images or even an inkling of who these characters might turn out to be in the story itself. And yeah, so that would be intuitive to you, especially someone who was alive during it, someone who has even more so grown up surrounded by these images and by this documentation.
Well, I think we all share that, right? I mean, certainly for March and MLK, I mean, we're dealing with something that's so well known, and people have their own, I don't know if the bias is the right word, they have their own ideas about, what that story is going to be. So within that, there's the opportunity to surprise people if you do your research and tell the story as it should be told, or based on not so much on common perceptions, which can often be wrong, but on some some semblance of the truth anyway. So
yeah, I guess I feel like Nate, you kind of touched on all the major points. Just to sort of piggyback a little bit off of what you said, I feel like there is a certain intimacy that is achieved through comics that is difficult to achieve, for example, through cinema or through television, even through works of prose, I think sometimes, just because, potentially the warmth of the images, especially that applies more to Derf and Nate's work. I think my work is a little harsher and off-putting, but I think there's
that's not true. Come on, man.
Well, that's always, but anyway, just to make the point, I sort of feel like there's a kind of a warmth that can draw a reader in, especially to stuff like history, which is can be a little bit musty for some readers. But if a historical account is being accompanied by beautiful illustration, there's a certain I can't come up with the word, but there's a gravity that is achieved that kind of draws the reader in. That I think comics like really lend themselves well to that, to telling historical stories and to telling political stories as well, in my opinion.
I think it's humanity more than gravity, and that's what I see in your guys' work. I mean, it's you capture these people and you flesh them out, and I think readers respond to that element more than anything, and maybe that's the strength of comics, at least our types of comics, because they're such personal works. I mean, they're one or two people working on a book, rather than, say, in film, as Toe brings up, where you've got 1,000 people and suits and executives and accountants and all this crap that kind of strip the humanity, not always, but often, out of that project, whereas we're kind of free to explore that.
Yeah, sometimes the demands of the filmmaking machine can be a little antithetical to the kind of one-on-one type of work I think is more achievable as a cartoonist. Absolutely.
Right. I mean, even in my experience, which was a small film company, just kind of seeing all the people involved, and all the balls they had to keep in the air. I was just amazed that any film project could be made at all, let alone made, you know, made well, or made something with a soul.
You know, both of y'all have had a pretty deep involvement with film production. So yeah, that's a really good counterpoint in terms of the unique advantages of what we do being so accessible for one person to execute, and yeah, the potential risks and payoffs of, you know, the scope being impacted by simply being a print book, or I guess just being a movie that falls through the cracks. Like perhaps it's comparable risk, but yeah, lots of cooks in the kitchen, I imagine.
Yeah, 100%.
Where are we going from here?
Help us out, TCAF people.
One thing I do want to go back to with what you were saying, Ho, about really talking about a sense of gravity when depicting these historical narratives. This again goes kind of outside our existence, the three of us as comics readers and like comics hyperliterate people or whatever. This is just the swamp we've grown up in. Whenever like during the years of talking about March with Congressman Lewis, it took me a while to kind of acclimate and process a lot of the ways that he was responding personally to this comics depiction of his first person experiences. And
no, he doesn't have the vocab, he doesn't have the, you know, the mental language to make that jump, right?
Well, right. As a kid, he grew up reading Sunday strips, but really wasn't much of a comics person.
Right.
There was definitely, I guess it would have been early 2012 when I finished the first 10 pages of March Book 1. And I just like barreled through them all. I sent them off to Andrew to show Congressman Lewis. And it was really one of those moments where I was at the very beginning of my learning curve, number one. And the first 10 pages of March Book 1 are centered around a kind of an alternate recreation of the lead up to the moment of action on Bloody Sunday in 1965. And basically there were very small logistical and factual inconsistencies, like gaffing and blocking inconsistencies with the positioning of people in space that didn't line up, or even like the what models of billy clubs and insignia were being used. This was me at the beginning of like the 4.5 years of like getting used to doing an hour and a half of research each day for every little thing.
Yes, sir.
So like in real time, to jump ahead, is where Andrew is processing what to do with some of these inconsistencies in those first 10 pages, when he recognized that structurally in March, the main story opens on inauguration morning with Congressman Lewis waking up at 5:30 in the morning. And thus this introductory sequence becomes a dream of him processing that day, which he was doing. Like part of Andrew's experience with the congressman was that Congressman Lewis was, in a lot of ways, was someplace else and would talk about like the spirit of history moving him, processing through it. So we allowed ourselves that freedom to kind of use some of those early mistakes to our advantage by shifting and expanding a little bit of the narrative, kind of loosening it up, which freed us. But when I sent off those first pages for John Lewis to see and read, you know, like I was like sweating buckets quietly at my house. You know, I was like, this is one of the most intimate, impactful, and traumatic experiences of Congressman Lewis's life. I just really hope that I was able to do justice. And Andrew, you know, thankfully, almost immediately sent me a text message back. It's like, I just want you to know, the Congressman read those first 10 pages. You brought him to tears. Congratulations, buddy. You delivered the experience. He said it was like being there, and that I saw inside his mind, which is interesting because like when there are components of the history that is objective and more removed, And then there are these memoir components of the history. And so recognizing that it is possible when we're talking about empathy and really getting to the core of the gravity, we're talking about a sense of drama that, when used correctly in one person's subjective experience, can expand beyond the strict limits of a tightly documented scene. So it kind of helped take the pressure off, but at the same time, I was like, okay, how do I prevent, a learning curve mistake like this from happening again? And so then that helped kind of up my diligence so that I felt more secure about locking down really tight historical accuracy, and started looking more seriously at opportunities to expand and get more subjective and even dreamier and more emotional whenever possible.
Interesting. You had a pressure. I'm not sure if Derf had the same pressure, but it's certainly a pressure I didn't have, in that I didn't have to live up to the standards and the approval of the subject matter I was covering. I was removed from that entirely. I'm not sure I could have handled that pressure. I would have been shitting my pants the entire time if I'd had MLK as my editor to make sure I captured the story correctly. So hats off for that. Understandable.
I have a question, really, very, very diplomatically dropping this question here.
I'm scared.
Going back to the early mid 90s here, what was the dynamic between you as a creator and the King estate, to whatever degree you had contact along the way? Because I know, rightly so, the King estate really carefully and closely guards a lot of Dr. King's, quotes, likeness, etc.
Right. Well, at the time, I was so young and I was so eager that, and I was so inexperienced in this sort of journalistic style storytelling, comic book storytelling, that reaching out to the King estate at that stage in my life was not a huge priority to me. Number one, first of all, it didn't honestly occur to me, as, like I said, as such an inexperienced creator. And second, I think there was a part of my brain that also didn't want to have to, because I knew how closely and jealously his image was guarded. And I had a suspicion that the approach that I was interested in taking, which was not the saintly approach, was not going to be appreciated by the King estate. Therefore, there was a part of me that sort of wanted to avoid their disapproval. And so we just kind of forged ahead without them. And then wound up getting like a kind of a nasty cease and desist letter after the first issue came out, which, we all proceeded to ignore completely. But the thing is, if I were doing it today, the first thing that I would do would be to reach out to the estate and just try to bring them on board as much as possible, and try to get them as sympathetic to the point of view that I had, not which was to take the man down, but just to show all the various facets and explain to them that the goal of doing that was not to denigrate the man, but to actually make him more relatable to a wider audience. I think I have the skill now to express that to them. I don't know if I would have been able to do that back when I was 20, whatever, 19, 20, 21, whatever it was. So yeah.
I think I would feel the same way. And frankly, this is where there is a difference. Hello, Derf.
Hey, Derf.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my internet just crashed on me. That's a first. I've done like 500 of these things, and that's the first time it bombed on me.
To catch you up for a sec, Ho and I were just talking.
You were talking about me, weren't you?
Yes, strictly about you this entire way. Basically, we were talking about sort of getting into what the dynamic or degree of interaction Ho had with the King estate in the early mid 90s as a young artist and different considerations. The only thing extra I was going to say there was, this is also how that dynamic and how the legal and ethical processes have changed over the decades. And so I think that is where you can't really process the degree of the degree of hurdles and difficulties you might have in the 2010s and 2020s doing King, the series, compared to what you did and to a lesser degree didn't experience in the 90s. I know that we had a hell of a time at certain parts in the March trilogy simply by not wanting to get too many eyes and feelers on us, which is like we had a very tight lock on the links of quotes, and tried to kind of use our storytelling skills to circumnavigate larger things like the "I Have a Dream" speech, and tried to use those limitations to our advantage to do something more creative that would then keep us in the clear.
Absolutely.
Now for you, Derf, like you're dealing with a whole mess of like a whole
21,000 students. Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's tricky. It was kind of I thought it would be more of a minefield than it was. But Nate's gone now.
No, everybody's gone. I'm getting off next.
Yeah, really. Maybe the mailman's here. But yeah, and everybody associated, well, at least the protest community they had very strong opinions, and they had their own agendas. So I thought it would actually be worse than it was. But for the most part, they were pretty welcoming, I think, because they recognized me as sympathetic and
a local.
Local. Yeah. I mean, that did work to my advantage that I'm an Ohio kid. And I knew I had introductions because I know a lot of people who are involved with that community, just people I've met in the arts community, because obviously Kent State, being a major university, is a kind of an arts hub. So people have, filtered out from there, and everything's connected, you know how it is. But yeah, I was very aware of that and was kind of surprised it wasn't more of a problem than it turned out to be.
Derf, I'm only about halfway through the book, so I haven't gotten to the part where you list all your research and your bibliography.
Right.
How much contact did you have with the families of the murdered students?
The families themselves, not that much, and that was by design, because I was more interested in talking to their friends and their classmates and housemates and people like that, because my thinking was, when you're in college, you're not really telling your parents what's going on that much. At least I didn't. Right. So I was more concerned with their lives there rather than their lives at home. So I have talked to some, but not a lot. Of course, their parents are all gone. So because it's so far in the rear view mirror, I'm sure you encountered the same thing with King.
Yeah,
we've lost a lot of people. So
fact.
That would have been a challenge anyway. So
interesting. That must have given you a fair amount of freedom then to sort of craft the story the way that you saw fit, I would assume, as opposed to having to appease the families in any way, or?
Right. Well, I always was pretty upfront about that. It's like, look, I'm not an activist. I mean, my sympathies may lie with your side of the story, but I'm not furthering your agenda. I'm a storyteller, so that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to tell more than just one story. Well, some of them were upset that I included an account of one of the guardsmen, which is a great account.
It is. It really adds so much.
Right, exactly. And it's not that I'm trying to do that, bullshit cable news thing where you show both sides. I just wanted to have that experience because those guys were going through something completely different than the students were. And I thought it was interesting as part of the story, and that was really I'm sure we're all the same way. I mean, that what we're really focusing on is the truth of the story and kind of the purity of the story. That's our main, that's the main goal.
Were those the two dudes that were in the tent where the one guy's bitching and the other guy's like, sweet gig, man?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that came from actually that came directly from another guardsman I interviewed who was talking about, I was really happy to, and that was in my hometown too. That tent was pitched like right across the street from my elementary school. So I remember that.
That's weird.
And yeah, so I mean, you try to get as close, you know, I really just try to get as close, and I'm sure you guys had the same motivation and experience. You try to get as close to these people as you can, even knowing that there's always going to be that distance, but man, you just try to get as, you know, within feet of them and just try to figure out what the hell was going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly. With working on March, it was that was certainly the case, and we benefited from recently digitized and available first-person accounts to finally be able to readily step past sort of an intermediary in terms of our sourcing. This is much more on Andrew's side of the work than me. For Save It for Later, I've been at the advantage that this is a book of nonfiction from start to finish, but it's a hybrid that bounces back and forth from memoir to essay. And it's where I'm sort of pushing that pendulum swing from subjective to objective as far as I can. But it's really the essay parts which required more research and more piecing together of far-reaching observations and questions, that it's really those components that actually made the diary comics work, because who cares about my autobiography comics?
Well, I don't know. I mean, memoir, yeah, I know. I mean, memoir is its own kind of thing. And if what I like about that book is that it is a hybrid. And I mean, I kind of did that too with my friend Dahmer. It was kind of a mix of memoir, and because that's always been my stance too. It's like, who the fuck cares about my life? You know,
Sure.
I mean, I'm really pretty boring. So
You're at the center of like a lot of interesting topics. What is going on with your life, man?
I don't know, man. I don't know. It's just I have no explanation for this stuff, but you know, there are great stories everywhere. I mean, you know, all you gotta do is look. That's what I tell people. It's like, just look around, look over your shoulder. There's probably a really good story there somewhere.
And that's a good approach to have in terms of like, who cares about my role in this or my perspective on it? Inevitably, especially because we're cartoonists, we are going to inject our sense of self, if not our memories and experiences, even grafting them on something else. But it's simply by being mindful of that rhetorical question that kind of helps, you know, helps temper it and minimize it, so that hopefully when you feel like you're at a crossroads where you're like, okay, well, this requires a little self-injection.
Well, you got to stay humble too. I mean, yes, you know, you can't like inflate yourself to this, you know, godlike status.
Without a doubt.
Of course, Ho did a book called God's Head. So I mean,
what a biography, by the way.
Yeah, which is an awesome book, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
The artwork in that book just absolutely blows me away. I mean, your artwork. No, don't just dismiss me. I mean, your artwork always blows me away, but that one in particular, how you like just morph style and media. I mean, it's like, what the hell is he using now to draw? I mean, it's like, man, this is great.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Sure. And Nate knows how I feel about his artwork, so I'm not going to flatter him more. But
oh, I take that. But yeah, like stylistically, I feel, I don't know, like once I made the decision that I needed on a therapeutic level, but also on a bigger kind of community, society-wide level, that I needed to kind of put some of these private experiences and the relationship between my family and my community to protest, and that protest movement to the nation as a whole. I feel very very fortunate that the previous several years were sort of not only was intertwined with the rise of the nib as a go-to platform for a lot of people to do kind of immediate on the ground topical cartooning, especially me not being a webcomics person at all. It was nice to kind of acclimate myself with a completely different sense of pacing and structure in a way. and seeing how like 15 or 20 different artists were approaching a lot of these shifts. Less of it on the nib was personal. There was a little more distance, but I think that's really what I needed to be able to figure out how to get out of my own head whenever possible for Save It for Later.
Why are we giving Boris a plug here? What's he done for us? Actually, he's a Canadian now. He went over the
It's
wall.
true. It's true.
Sorry, who were we talking about?
The Nib, Matt Boris,
Boris,
is
yeah.
the editor and founder of the Nib.
I was just going to ask, what is I'm not familiar with the Nib.
Oh, it's like it's an online, or well, it's also a print thing. It's collects indie comics and political comics, mostly with a political bent. So
it started out being under medium.com's umbrella, and then went independent, and is still doing its thing, functioning and thriving as an indie venture.
Yeah, Nick does a lot. I've never worked for it either, but
it was kind of a nice push into the world of web comics, especially like being somebody who makes almost exclusively long form comics work and not having the advantage of, whether as an adult doing comics in serial form, or a lengthy life doing political and editorial cartooning with a much tighter turnaround. So it was sort of a nice complete shift in approach, and being able to do some shorter comics along the way kind of helped suit me for it.
I did that for 25 years with a comic strip. I mean, I kind of burn out on I prefer, actually, I'm really enjoying doing long form. The longer the better. Obviously, each of my books gets bigger. It's kind of ridiculous.
I remember your work from the 90s, Derf. I used to
Right.
have a magazine called I Weekly here in Toronto.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. That was a fun little paper. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I was in a bunch of those things, like 150.
You were in it for a long time.
I know. Yeah. Right. It was great while it lasted, but everything has its time, and then like I said, I'm really enjoying longer form storytelling, and it turns out I'm much better at this than I was at that. So it's too bad it took me that long to realize that. But
well, I thought those strips are pretty great myself.
oh, thank you. It was fun while it lasted, but you can't stay in one place.
No, I hear that, brother.
Yeah,
for sure. I think in terms of long form, just before I decided I needed to do Save It for Later, I had just finished Come Again and another book called Too Dead that I was in the process of doing. And both of these books I had begun work on in 2011, and kind of bit by bit, incrementally kept putting them on the back burner, mostly to meet with the demands and changing responsibilities of March, but also because along the way, then, what I had previously done, would more or less go in the garbage. And I was working at a certain clip where I was like, no, I got to try this again. I got to pencil this again.
What was the page? What's the final page total of March? Is it like
around 560 pages or so?
Oh, that's just obscene. 500 pages. Wow, that's amazing.
It's interestingly at the onset, when Andrew sent me the final first version of the script, it was for a single graphic novel called March, and he was much more like, as a writer working on the script, he was personally like inspired and thinking of the 1957 comic Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery story, and it was done very much in like a Silver Age house style 6-panel grid. It was like such a beautiful, classy comic, but getting the script, it was interesting to see like how much our process of writing and drawing for each other evolved. So within like 2 days of getting the script, I wrote him and Top Shelf back, and I was like, really excited about this. It's going to be great. Just to let you know, this is not going to be a 270-page book. It'll be about 600. If that's okay with you guys, then we'll just keep on going.
You knew that early on?
Basically, I would just print out the script, and this is just
start thumbnailing.
Well, I would basically just draw single lines in the script between panels and double lines for pages, Like
Wow.
I would just go like musically, like where I knew there was a beat or a measure. That's what I do before I thumbnail. And I knew like this is the thing I can count on most, is knowing where my panel breaks are from a script. So I was certain, which was interesting because at the time everybody's like, yeah, sure, let's make a brick of a book. But
I have no idea until I start thumbnailing. That's, really how it's gonna pan out.
it changed things a lot. I'm glad that our decision to break it up into a trilogy was, for Andrew and I, was primarily us just like, we wanted to take the pressure off a little. So we're like, we have these natural breaks. We weren't thinking about the advantages it would have, not just in terms of the books as products, but in terms of being able to better describe and capture the expansion of the movement, and also give readers a chance to literally grow up as they read the books over the span of 4 years and be able to tackle the density and complexity and darkness later in the trilogy. Like March wouldn't have been what it became had we just put out one 600-page book and we're like, here it is.
Yeah. Thud.
Questions about that. Number one, how much did Andrew's script change from when you first got it to the day you drew the last page? And second, how do you work that out on a practical level? You're contracted to produce a 200-page book. All of a sudden you're producing a 600-page book. Like, how are the bills paid? Like, how does the financing work with something like that?
Well, to answer that question,
get too personal, but
last part first, because it's a shorter answer. I was still doing multiple books at once while I was doing March. So I got my steady paycheck along the way by doing a Rick Riordan book adaptation for Hyperion. It was just like I've been a full-time cartoonist since 2009, but the way generally I've been able to make ends meet, especially as a dad of 2, etc., is because, well, my wife gets the health insurance here in the good old States where you're sweating buckets if you have to go to the doctor for anything. But so that was important. But number 2,
very well, that's the first rule of a career in comics.
Yes, indeed. That was a big part, but also like sectioning out my time so that, especially I guess I started drawing March when I was already a dad. So all the free time went out the window already. But yeah, a lot of it had to do with like when I had these moments that were more clear schedule-wise, working myself to the bone, knowing I would fall behind later, hoping it would even out. Going back to the first part, evolution in the script, a lot of that was fascinating because the core of the script and his structure, his vision, and like the framing devices, all of that stayed the same. Like his initial vision of what the account would be as March stayed the same. However, in real time, not only was our access to information and primary source documents and declassified government documents, all that was changing in real time as we moved along, which required a more and more active involvement by Lee, our editor, as a 4th co-creator, in my opinion. And Andrew was doing the same job on a lot of levels that Lee was doing. It just required 2 people in terms of fact checking and deep dives and cross-referencing with each other.
Yeah, but it's really fun to be looking at documents with that big classified on the top of it, I mean, it's kind of a thrill.
It was, I never, like, this is where being on the final step, being the drawing table, like it was like Christmas morning when I would discover that Lee or Andrew had made some big find. And so it was my first time to feel that sense of excitement. There are moments where even as late as 2 days before March Book 3 went to the printer, I literally cut up with scissors and pasted expanded panel sequences into the very end of March Book 3 during all the speeches on the Alabama state capitol steps, because Lee had, like, overnight as we were doing final corrections and everything, Lee had found some, declassified document from the government, like in their Indiana Jones vault, that was an audio file only that Hoover's FBI had taken, because like the crowd at the end of the march was crawling with feds.
Right.
And so there were photographs that we found. They were
So was Kent State.
Oh yeah. And importantly though, like once these documents came in, like there were full recordings of all the speeches, but the tapes, like the physical tapes, eventually, someone in the government digitized them and saved them like as MP3 files, but had not yet transcribed them. So there's no way to even search for these things or use metadata. So like it was a matter of like Lee then becoming the person who listened and transcribed an FBI document for the first time, which was how I woke up 2 days before the print deadline, where he was like, "You guys, what if I told you that Rosa Parks herself spoke on March 25th, 1965, and no one has ever documented it in a book or anything?" And I'm like, that's impossible. That's stupid. How could that be? And simply, it has to do with like how quickly you fall off the line of primary source information. And history writers look at other history writers and other books. So March Book 3 became the first book to contribute to the historical record. So what I had to cut up the pages and add Rosa Parks' speech for the first time and fold it in. It was wild.
Yeah, I mean, with all three of the topics we're talking about here, I mean, MLK and March and Kent State, what the challenge is it's not lack of information, it's this mountain range of material, and you've got to find somehow what's useful in there. It's a completely different challenge than I faced with some other books, say like My Friend Dahmer, where there just wasn't a lot of information because nobody talked, or it just wasn't there, wasn't documented. This is the polar opposite. So yeah, it can be really daunting, and you can easily miss stuff. I mean, you just kind of stumble across it, even as if you're doing fairly meticulous and strategic research, you're still going to miss stuff.
I worked on King research only for 6 months solid. That was 5 days a week, 8-hour days of just doing nothing but research. And I could have easily continued that process for another year.
Yeah, I hear you.
With little, I was going to say with little effort, it would have been a hell of an effort, but I mean, it would have been entirely doable. And trying to cherry pick, trying to find a through line, to hang a narrative on through all that research was, to this day, one of the hardest tasks that I've ever had to go, because it was a bottomless pit, man.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, there'd be more on King than anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you go to how much were you doing this in person? Did you go down to Memphis? Did you go to?
I did not. See, that's over the years, that's been the biggest regret that I've had.
I don't know that that's really an issue anymore, because so much of it is online now. I mean, the archives have all been
you're not wrong.
Online. Like the FBI vault is completely online.
No, you're absolutely correct, but that was not the case back in 1990. And I think I would have.
Oh, that's true. That's right. Oh, right.
The internet, and also I just feel that the work benefits from having some kind of contact with the actual people involved, if not involved, then people who had some real life connection to what went down. I just feel like there's an essence that's going to creep into the work. There are little details that'll creep into the work that are unattainable.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you guys have discovered this in your own work. So if I were to do it today, that would again, like I was saying to Nate earlier, that would be one of the first things that I would do. But that wasn't so much of an option back in 1990.
Well, it's easier for me because I'm writing mostly stories in my backyard. So, it's no problem for me to drive down to Kent State, for example. It's like 45 minutes away.
Right.
But I do agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Just to put yourself in that space and just walk through those same areas, with all your senses working and your mind focusing on that, and see what you can pull out of thin air. And yeah, you can get details. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm working on a film project that's going to be like a 10-minute animated thing. We have an organization here in Canada called the National Film Board of Canada, and I'm working
Yeah,
on
we know it.
them. And it's about a town, a community in Nova Scotia that got raised in the 60s called Africville. And so right now I'm kind of going through a lot of the research, reading government documents and minutes of meetings and all that stuff. But the next part of my research is going to be spending like a couple of months in Nova Scotia and just walking the land and meeting the people and immersing myself as much as humanly possible, learning the mistakes or correcting the mistakes that I made when I was, when I was a kid working on King. So yeah, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, it's worth a lot. I mean, especially in that, like, it's some of the joy of the slim crew that's going on with what we're making, whether it's short indie film, whether it's comics. It adds to mobility, and it adds to your ability to kind of like temper your own regrets and discontents about previous work.
Yes, sir.
You're just able to apply it forward.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, with Save It for Later, I didn't feel this way while I was in the thick of kind of writing it and penciling, but it was certainly a little anxiety inducing that it was about this authoritarian power, living through an authoritarian power grab that's happening in real time really quickly while I'm writing and drawing the book.
Right.
And I'm making it not knowing how much is going to be obsolete by the time the book is published, if any. And so trying to think ahead of, like, basically writing the book for the future while trying to reference events that are happening that day, that week, that month. That is not my strong suit. So there are certain moments.
That's
like,
what political cartoons are for. I mean,
Yes,
that immediacy, right? I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, no, that would be, I was thinking about that too, actually, when you were finishing that book, because Nate and I work for the same publisher. So I kind of was
Disclaimer.
clued in on this. It's like, whoa, because, I had that terrifying experience of Kent State was supposed to come out in May 2020, and then it got delayed because of, the plague and all. And then over the course of the summer, suddenly all of this stuff started happening in this country with the BLM protests and millions in the streets and the crackdown and then Trump. And I was like, holy shit, it's all going to blow up. My book's still in the warehouse and no one's going to give a shit about it when it comes out in September. I mean, we're allowed to be, selfish and,
Sure.
and small-minded because we're comics creators.
And
it was absolutely terrifying to see this repetition, first of all. And I'm sure, looking down from, your safe haven up there in Canada, looking down at this chaos down here, you just had to be horrified in a different way.
Yeah,
but,
I was horrified, my friend. But
yeah,
the thing is, though, I mean, I worked on my comic book, 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it was. Subject matter is still entirely relevant.
Right, sure it is.
Kent State, still entirely relevant. March is relevant. These works are unfortunately, never not going to be relevant. So the time to release them is always whenever.
When we do our job well, this is where these historical accounts and these personal accounts are always written for the time they're published, for readers in the future who haven't read them.
That's a good way to put that.
So, yeah, when we do our job, you have to trust that readers will make those connections to their world immediately. So that was part of my central focus in Save It for Later, was trying to craft something that would survive electoral outcome, survive the existence or dissolution of democracy, something that would be less about navel gazing and hand wringing about a moment, when recognizing that, like, for the next 10 years, we're still going to be living in the last 5 years, trying to work out of this hole. So it's like the worst kind of timeliness, but it's the most necessary kind of timeliness for the work when figuring out how to tell it best.
Yep. Well said.
I just want to unfortunately interject here. It's been such a privilege to be a fly on the wall in this conversation, and no longer a fly on the wall as all of our listeners have been listening along. But just such wonderful insights and some really humorous moments. But since we don't have a live audience for this panel, I just want to ask you as panelists a few questions that might have come from our live audience. So I won't take up too much of your time for this, but to get started, Ho, you are quoted in the intro to King, written by Stanley Couch, as saying, "I wanted to create my version of this story. The life of Martin Luther King was a script. I had to be the director. These aren't cartoon versions of photographs. These are my camera angles, my close-ups, my decisions for when it's going to be black or white or in color or whatever. It's what I want to be judged by because that's where I come in." So with this in mind, my question to all three of you is, how do these narratives function as a presentation of your own subjectivity or your own experimentation as an artist rather than as a story about the subjects they present?
Oh my God, I apologize for that quote, by the way. That guy's a tool. That is just rough.
He was young. He was young. Cut him some slack.
Do not quote cartoonist quotes to them, man. That's just not good. Yeah, well, I always feel like comics. I feel like any artistic endeavor, but I feel like this really kind of applies in spades to comics. I always think of them as diary entries, regardless of what I'm working on. If only because you draw a page on Monday, and it'll turn out a certain way. If you were to attack that same page on Wednesday, it would be a different beast. You've gone through something different, you're feeling something different, you're inspired in a different way. Your hand works, it doesn't work, you're in the groove, you're not in the groove. Girlfriend broke up with you, boyfriend thinks you're a jerk, whatever. These things will come into the work on some level. And so I always feel like when I look back at my old work that I can really kind of pinpoint what I was going through in any particular moment. So I think you kind of, just by virtue of the fact that it's your hand and your mind guiding that hand on that page, it's gonna come out as a personal statement, no matter what you do. Regardless, I've tried to divorce my authorial voice from my work in the past, and it has been to no avail. So they're diary entries, man. That's kind of what they are, in my opinion.
For me, I think with the fact that Save It for Later was what had to be largely memoir, and that was sort of my initial sense of urgency making it, was trying to make even a slimmer, thinner book that I could finish in 6 months and get out on the ground in 2019 or 18 as fast as I could. My concept for the book and what it would entail changed quickly as I started folding essay into it and sort of started shifting the perspective of the book outward as much as possible. But in terms of storytelling perspective, one of the things that helped kind of take away some of that fear that it was just being centered around me and my family, even though it was trying to make my character the idiot or the reactionary or the hypocrite whenever possible. And some of that is done verbally, some is done, implicitly and non-verbally, but trying to, whenever possible, establish that I am a person who's feeling the intense rage and sadness and anxiety, and that also clouds my judgment at points. And really trying to lean on that, like, it's not even the unreliability of the narrator, but to me, it's the point of doing the book was not that this is what my family experienced, because who cares? It's the fact that these experiences are things that people are already not talking about, yet they're experiences and sentiments and feelings that were shared by a sizable majority of Americans, even across most of the political spectrum. The further right you go, the more quickly that's sort of shut down and normalized. But I think like the space necessary to talk about that was horribly and remains horribly underserved. So basically I pushed that component of it in the hopes that this actually helps clear out space for society at large to begin unpacking so much of that baggage.
I think I've forgotten what the question was now.
Just how your own subjectivity comes into play on these subjects.
Right. I tried to keep that at bay, honestly. I mean, certainly with Kent State more than some of my other books. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be monologuing or, and I was trying to tell the story of these 4 people, well, really 5 people. So that's mainly what it's going to seep in no matter. I mean, obviously you're making storytelling decisions based on personal biases at some level, but I was more focused on the detective work of the research and then presenting a clear narrative. I really did try to keep that at arm's length.
Interesting. Well, perspective is so important to each of your narratives with regards to the interpretation of protest movements and their symbols and figures. Ho, you start King with a double-page grid of a set of witnesses speaking about Dr. King. Nate, you begin March with John Lewis's point of view of the water under the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then Save It for Later with your own family in an embrace, while Derf, you preface Kent State with 2 maps of the campus and surrounding area, followed by the image of armed National Guardsmen in Richfield, Ontario. Sorry, not Ontario, Ohio.
Wait a minute.
Whoa,
That'd be
they
great
really crossed some lines.
if we were annexed. I would fully support that. But
in
it hasn't happened
1970.
yet.
Fingers crossed. In what ways are the initial perspectives encoded in these images affecting the rest of the narrative's interpretation?
I think with March, and this was not conscious at all in 2012 when I would have started work on March, but very quickly I think it helped set the stage that a lot of the sensory experience and particularly Congressman Lewis's incredibly sharp sense memory and detail-oriented memory, so that it would require, I would circle back, and Andrew would certainly circle back over the years to get more and more details from the same stories and the same accounts. But a lot of it is being a cartoonist and seeing things visually and even having sensory experiences cross over in my comics mind as visuals. It was very obvious that what a textual account doesn't show about the Pettus Bridge on March 7th, 65 is what it's like to be right in the middle of the bridge walking and recognizing there's no escape because you're looking 100 feet down into a river and you can't swim. And so to me, it was sort of a no-brainer. We're also sort of inside John Lewis's head, and there's inaudible dialogue coming from Hosea Williams, and we pulled back out into the world, and it sort of helped set parameters that we are going to be that closely inside Congressman Lewis's head whenever possible. And for Save It for Later, a lot of it simply had to do with trying to be as plain as possible. Instead of trying to cater to my own doubts about doing autobiographical or memoir comics for this, I just tried to be very direct about it. So it opens with a splash page of me dropping off my 4-year-old at pre-K and having an interaction with her beloved teacher on the morning after Election Day in 2016. And I tried to keep the camera angle flat, full body head-on shots, which I normally don't do, just trying to set things up in a very plain way that would undercut what I felt like my own automatic instinct would be to cover up or obfuscate the storytelling with some kind of dreamy, wishy-washy nonsense that I do on occasion.
I love your dreamy, wishy-washy nonsense.
Yeah.
So do I. Thanks.
Sorry, what's the question again?
So, for example, King starts with a double-page spread of witnesses talking about Dr. King. And so I'm just wondering how each of your first perspectives in the text kind of sets the tone narratively for the rest of the text.
Oh, that's interesting. That is fascinating. I have never even given that so much as a second's consideration before. As usual.
Irene loves to ask questions like this that you've never, yeah.
I'm telling you, our questions are way too smart.
I know, right?
Trying to fully process.
I'm gonna turn my camera off. I'm blushing.
For me, I think your style, this is where your stylistic shift becomes character to a degree. Just like your experimentation and playfulness in style throughout that story, like functions as an echo. Like if I really want to stick to the framework of the question, I feel like there's a lot of, it reminds me of Brooklyn Dreams by J.M. DeMatteis and Glenn Barr. Just the open field of stylistic experimentation operates as different cameras and different viewpoints, even when it's not, even when it's stuck to one person's experience.
All right.
You can't answer Hoche's question for him, but you know that, right?
Nate, you can take all my questions, buddy.
Well, I would say it's what strikes me was all the close-ups in that book. You know, it's like you're like right on top of these guys, where it's just, you know, just the face. It's like I'm gonna get right inside what they're saying, right inside what they're thinking. That's what struck me about. And there's so many of them.
I mean, I didn't. Well, here's the thing. I didn't create that idea. It was a thorough theft job from Warren Beatty's Reds. If anybody's ever seen Reds.
Yeah, I love Reds.
Thank you, and as do I. And I just like the idea of before we were confronted with this, with our impressions of this individual. I like the idea that because he was such a cultural figure and such a well-known figure, that we would be sort of introduced to impressions of him before we were able to kind of form our own interpretations of who we were dealing with.
Because he was a real person, and these are people who knew him.
Exactly.
So yeah, that was a great storytelling choice.
Thank you, man. Thanks to Warren Beatty. And
well, we all have our we all rip
it.
off everybody else. You
Exactly.
got a good idea, you find a good idea, hell yeah, take it and reinterpret it as your own.
And the other thing is, it was a very kind of just as a writer, it was just a very convenient way to be able to convey large bits of information to get me from one point in King's life story to another point. It was sort of an easy way to sort of hurdle over bits of narrative that I didn't want to actually have to convey. I'm not sure I'd use that technique again. I would probably do a more focused version of his life as opposed to the kind of cradle to grave thing that I attempted, but it worked in that context.
Awesome. Derf, did you want to add anything about kind of that first image that we see of the National Guardsman in Kent State, especially as we pull back, we find that it's your childhood perspective as you're going by in a car.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to establish a connection to the story, even if it was kind of a loose one, and the impact that it had on me, even as a kid, because I thought that was important. But beyond that, and it got the narrative rolling and let me do a splash page followed by a double page spread, which is incredibly indulgent. But it's my book, so screw it, right? And
Derf, do you write a script for your comics, or do you?
I did for Kent State just to kind of organize my thoughts, but mostly I write with thumbnails.
Okay.
And I did for My Friend Dahmer. I wrote a script for that too, but otherwise, no. I just kind of dive in. How about you?
Yeah, I like to write, so I kind of just get off on writing a full script, stage direction, dialogue. I just do the whole thing.
Wow, really? That detailed? Wow.
I just delivered a script for a book called The Resurrectionist to Abrams Books a few months back, and I'll show it to you. Maybe I won't show it to you. I don't know.
No.
There it is. Look at this behemoth. It's
Wow.
252 pages long.
Wow. So that's like a classic DC Comics script where you've got man enters through door, has long nose, that kind of stuff.
Yes, sir.
Wow, that's awesome.
I like to have a very solid foundation, and it's just kind of I get off on sitting at a computer typing, so it's
Well, I like it too. But I think the script for Kent State, it wasn't that. You know, it was maybe 50 pages, and you know, the book is, you know, it's huge. So obviously, I just use it as a kind of a jumping off point.
Gotcha.
Well, we could spend so much more time talking together and talking about these wonderful issues. I know there's several more things I'd love to talk to you about, but our time is coming to a close. So just before I wrap it up to thank our sponsors, I'd like each of you to take a second to tell us where we can find your works, what you're working on now, any maybe social media you have you want to draw our listeners' attention to.
You know, the usual: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The books are everywhere you find books, and it's that's not my book.
I just did your book. Pay attention.
I'll take credit for it. But, I'm working on now, you know, just new stories, new scripts. I mean, I haven't really decided on something yet, but I'll just keep going. I'm not as fast as Nate or Ho, but
I know Nate's ridiculous.
I know
Nate's got a new book
I hate him. I hate him more with each passing year.
True.
But, all right, you're up.
Sure, I'll go. For me, yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I guess my name is just the thing. And yeah, save it for later is what I just finished. Right now I'm working on, well, 3 books. One of them, like here are 2 of them. One of them's fiction, and one of them is a memoir collaboration with another punk writer. And there's a third one that's going to be a really cool adaptation of a history-oriented nonfiction book that I'm doing with another author. And I can't talk about any of that, but Run Book 1 will be out in August. So that's something that I did that's coming up or helped do.
Also from Abrams, our beloved publisher.
We're all 3 Abrams boys at this point.
Man, that's amazing.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is.
I'm working on a bunch of stuff. I'm trying to finish off Godhead. I got a page. I've had on the books for forever because I'm busy working on some film stuff, directing a couple movies and writing a couple movies, and writing some stuff for Marvel, and I'm finishing up a run on Captain Canuck for Canadian publisher. Got a bunch of stuff in the works, so I'm having a good time.
Wonderful. I can't wait to read all and watch all of those things in the future. And Instagram, right. And we thank you so much for being here today and speaking with us and being a part of TCAF 2021's festivities. We have many great sponsors that make these programs possible, and we'd like to thank our partnering sponsor responsible for bringing you TCAF 2021 programming, which is Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation, with special thanks to the Beguiling Books and Art shop, Page and Panel, the TCAF shop, as well as government support from the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and Toronto Arts Council. Stay tuned for more great TCAF programming. Coming up next is Jordan Sparks' Comic Jam, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks so much, everybody. Wonderful seeing you today.